So maybe I could present myself. So I work in Lausanne in Switzerland. I am a CFP therapist. I practice and teach GPM, and I have some training in MBT and DBT. So what I would like to start to say as an introduction is that when we speak of theories or of models, we tend to speak of one thing as if it was always the same and fixed. And I think that ideas, in fact, they move and they are produced by people who invent them and work a lot to make them coherent. And then they write them, they print them, and guys like me, we buy the book and we try to practice the ideas. So I think that we can say that life of ideas doesn't stop when the book is printed. And there's a kind of second life where clinicians like I am have to keep the idea alive. And there is danger in that because when ideas move, they come. What was very useful to make an idea coherent when it was built can become something quite rigid if we can only see the strict way it was written. And the risk is that theory becomes a kind of empty word theory, something like a rhetorical way of describing a clinical reality, and that they lose the kind of contact with the clinical experience that was at the root of the creation of the theory. And if that happens, I think coherence becomes rigidity. That's a point. Another point is that I would like to say that mixing ideas, working with different ideas, integrating them, is at the root of clinical thinking. It's not something that emerges now. It's at the root of every medical practice. And Masquelet wrote a little book about medical thinking in 2006, and he's a surgeon, so it's kind of quite different practice as ours. But he says that what we know is that clinical thinking is made of different ideas, and we can define these different ideas quite easily. What is more difficult to understand, and maybe Brandon gave us some understanding of that, is that we don't know why and how clinicians move from one idea to another. It may be that in our field we have a little advance on that because we are thinking of why should we use one idea at one time or another idea at another time. So I would like to base my presentation on the user of theory point of view. What happens to your books once you've written them and once we buy them, once they are distributed when we buy them. And I will focus on the process of eclecticism that seems important to do that work. So at clinical level, being able to have different ways of thinking and using the diversity with coherence is a necessity to keep theories alive. So my idea is that it's not something that we should not think, is it legitimate to do it? We should think that it is our duty to keep these ideas alive and maintain them in a stream where we think with them. I'm not very good at religion and faith, so I think we can have some help from philosophy. Diderot in Encyclopedia defined eclecticism as being something that is neither dogmatic, neither syncretism, syncretism being something that ideas put together without being organized. So how have we used our ideas until now? I think, Ken, you have been describing that for very long. The different theories we use have been seen as antagonist. We can't use both. We have to choose if we drink one or another, and we focus a lot on every difference between these things. And I'm not a fan of these soft drinks, but basically they look quite the same. They have a lot in common. So I would like to give another idea, and I'm afraid I'm revealing a lot too much of myself, but at antagonism I prefer the idea of cocktail making. When you make a cocktail, you can't do anything you want. You have to follow rules. You have to know the product. And every product has to find his way, and you should detect it in the final cocktail. If you mix everything, however you want, it won't be good. So I think this way of mixing theories makes more sense. And some cocktails are pretty good. So for the second part, I will speak about the cocktail between GPM and TFP. Richard will be much more exhaustive about these different points. I just use the points I want to focus on. Both theories are coherent conceptions of BPD and BPD treatment, and both of us integrate a psychological point of view with a relational point of view. GPM is explicit on theory and based on psychoanalytical and cognitive behavior theories, as TFP integrates and is sitting on a very strong psychoanalytic tradition. Both of them have explicit ways of speaking of BPD to the patient and rely on psychoeducation. Why I love them? Maybe that's the faith part of the faith slide. I love GPM because it's accessible. It is highly concerned with public health issues. It's something you can teach quite easily. And it opens the mind of clinicians on the importance of relations in the clinical setting and of transference and counter-transference issues. TFP I love because it's a very deep understanding of our patients. It has concern for identity issues, which I think where it's stronger than other theories. It has its own theory on aggressivity, and of course is focused on transference. GPM is an easy model to teach to non-specialists. TFP is very inspiring, but it's difficult to access. It's a complex model. Both of them focus on relations and emotions, and both of them are strong sources of inspiration outside the strict use they were designed for. So I will just focus on two major differences between GPM and TFP, is definition or understanding of aggressivity and understanding of work with transference. In GPM, aggressivity is understood with the model of interpersonal hypersensitivity. So the relational and reactive part of aggressivity is really important. It does not mean that it's the only way of understanding aggressivity, but the main focus is on the interpersonal hypersensitivity. In TFP, aggressivity exists on its own. It's there, and you have to deal with it. And that's a different point of view. It's not a reaction to someone's aggressivity or being a victim or something, or being rejected. Another difference between GPM and TFP is the way you work on transference. In GPM, you would work on transference if there is an issue or the treatment is a problem, if there's a relational issue that has to be addressed to go on. Of course, in TFP, transference is the central process of the therapy. There are more differences, of course, but that's the ones I will use in my example. So now I will try to show how in Lausanne we try to mix GPM and TFP and try to solve a problem we have with trying to implement short interventions for specialized interventions for BPDs. So why should we try to do brief interventions? First, there's a public health concern of economicity. If we have short treatment, we can propose it to more people, short interventions. We use short interventions a lot to investigate situations where the clinician doesn't see the personality problem. So people who come with a depressive diagnosis. And And our experience is that short interventions improve the therapeutic orientation, that we can orient the patient to one or another therapy, and fosters motivation for treatment. But in the group of patients, we have emerged, a group of highly functioning patients, and then we started to have the question, could it be that a short treatment is the best treatment for highly functioning patients who come with a demand, but who probably don't need a very highly invested treatment, and who could go on with a 10-session treatment? I come back a little. In our sessions for the brief interventions, we heavily rely and use interpersonal hypersensitivity concept, and we use it in two ways. First, it's a very good help to teach how to take personal history for trainees, because it helps to show repetitions of events in the life of the patient, and we also use it for psychoeducation. One problem we have is if we have badly functioning patients or low functioning patients, we will have a lot of examples for psychoeducation in their story, and they will tell us with their story. If we have highly functioning patients, they will have much less interpersonal episodes. And I think this is the example. I won't read that, of course. I have to be fast. It's a young patient. He's 22 years old, and he's a student. He's rather functioning well. His studies are going well, but his affective life is very difficult, and he had a conflict with his girlfriend and felt rejected, and then he sent her very nasty emails, and then the next day he was shocked by his own behavior. He saw the students' consultation for two sessions, and then he left, arguing that he should work on his exams. He came back 6 months later, and approximately the same thing happened. He saw his ex-girlfriend kissing a boy in a party, university party, and then wrote her very bad messages. And I would like to speak of the second session. I was just taking his personal history, and at the end of it, it was quite coherent, and he didn't have major trauma or didn't abuse drugs or things like that. But I told him that I was surprised that when he spoke of himself, he didn't speak about his affective personal history. And then he started to be tensed, to be a little nervous, and said that he didn't speak of it because he wasn't happy. And he had the feeling that he had nothing interesting, that girls could never be interested by him, and that every time he tries to get close to a girl, she starts to be rejecting with him, and it makes him very angry. And he starts to look at me and says, "But what will you think of me? I'm just telling you that I'm a nasty guy with girls." Until then, I think I was quite in the GPM model, and my attitude there was to say, it may be that what's happening now is that you are feeling that I could reject you because you presented yourself in that bad way. And maybe you have the feeling that it's the second time we meet, but I'm already thinking of how will I get rid of him. And he said, that's exactly what happens. I have the feeling that you want to reject me. I'm so bad that you couldn't be interested in me. And I went back to GPM that way and said, well, I think that what happens between us is something that happens in your life. And it reminds me a concept we use to understand borderline personality, and it's called interpersonal hypersensitivity. So I think I could describe this clinical example saying that I took in GPM public health preoccupations, worry for treatment accessibility. Treatment indication is shared by GPM and TFP, but for that second's active use of transference was something that I took in TFP, and then injected it in that short seconds to come back to psychoeducation, not to go in a full TFP therapy, but go back to psychoeducation. So now I have to go to the conclusions. I think that using actively transference, heating the transference in the relation, which is typically TFP inspired, may help to differentiate two types of short interventions in a public health service specialized for BPD patients. And that, I hope, is a good example of how we can use together different theories to make something that you couldn't do with only one of them. And my last word would be that I think you can only integrate things you know well. And it's just like cocktail. You can do good cocktails if you know what you mix. And I maybe will finish to say that I love gin because it mixes so well. Thank you.